get started. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited about our topic, Family Office Enterprise Thinking and the Family Office Owner's Manual. For those who I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm Danielle Patterson, CEO of Family Office List, and it's truly an honor to be here with you all. I love that we do these live. They're always fun and engaging. I always encourage you to interact. I'm very excited about today's guest speaker, Josh Kanter, who brings over 2 decades of experience and deep insights into the family office world. And for those of you who are new to our MasterClass series, really our goal is to create a space for deep, meaningful discussions on topics that really empower us to elevate the family office list community. And today's session is definitely no exception. We're going to really dive into how family enterprise thinking can really be a game changer in managing the complexities of multi-generational wealth and family dynamics. So Josh is an expert, really excited to introduce him here in a minute. But before I do that, a couple housekeeping notes. I think most of you have figured out I have enabled the chat, and this is fun. Both Josh and I have dropped our LinkedIn. We'd love to connect so we can continue conversations after this. If you all would like to introduce yourselves to each other, it's always a fun networking opportunity. Like I said, these are live for a reason. We want this to be about you, to be able to ask your questions and interact. So the Q&A is a great place to drop your questions just so they don't get lost amongst any networking that's going on. So feel free. Today's session will be recorded, and I'll be sure to follow up tomorrow with a link to that. So if there are other families or advisors who would really benefit from this information, you're free to share. We'll also share information how you can get a hold. Obviously, Josh's LinkedIn is there, but we'll include more in our follow-up. But yes, just to get started, to give a little bit more insight into Josh. I know he's going to tell his own story today, which I'm excited about. But just a brief overview, he started his career as a lawyer focusing on corporate and security laws, mergers and acquisitions. And really, as he tells his story, you're going to learn how this has evolved into so much more. In 2001, you'll learn how he took over the role of president of his family's single family office. And really over the past 20 years, he's been responsible for this multi-generational communication, governance, all the things that come with running a family office. He's also the founder of leafplanner, which is an amazing platform he really developed to solve the problems that he faced experiencing, trying to juggle all the components that come with running a family office. So it's a vital tool that has helped him and create transparency and really helped educate the family members and helped as they plan for succession. So he's going to share all of this and more with us today. And I would really like to leave, time so that this can really be Josh's opportunity to take the stage, and then that we can make time for all of you to ask your questions. So yeah, without further ado, Josh, thank you for being here today. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Danielle. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here, and thank all of you who are joining as people continue to join. I'm really excited to do this. And I'm just so impressed, Danielle, also with you and what you're building with Family Office List. And so continued good luck with that. And I love that you're building an entire community around this and these master classes and really bringing people together in a sense of community and learning. So I would love this session to really be about learning. Obviously, I don't know really who's here and what everybody's backgrounds are. And I'm sure there's a lot of diversity in the background and knowledge level. So I apologize if I'm either too dumb or too far ahead, or for anybody who's here, and happy to make this as interactive as possible. As Danielle said, please use the chat. I think she's going to help me keep an eye on.
Oh yeah,
just ramble on. I will ramble on, and I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground. So I may talk fast as well. Sometimes I get limited amount of time to talk about this, and I say instead of changing the content, I just regulate how fast I talk. I want to make sure that I cover as much as I can. So I'm going to share my screen here, if that's okay. So this had been titled Mastering Family Enterprise and Creating Comprehensive Family Owners Manual. And that is something that, as Danielle really commented on, is something I did for our family going back over 20 years ago. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And that is the basis of what Leaf Planner is about. But I really, again, I want to make sure that you guys understand this is my intent here today is to do this. This is about education. This is about learning from each other. This is not a pitch for what I'm doing. Happy to talk about that, but that's really not kind of it's core to what I think is important in lasting family enterprises, not the way you get there. So please take this with a grain of salt in that respect. I'm going to skip over my background because I'm going to do that as I give you my story and share with you what obviously you can see there is the Kanter story. I want to talk a little bit about family offices and what, at least to me, what that really means. And I think that's important because level setting what a family office is, at least in some respect, definitionally, is really important, especially to me these days when, family offices have the word is obviously, or the words, I guess it's multiple words, have expanded and people use it very loosely and there's no common definition for it. And often it's a first generation wealth creator with a liquidity event, setting up an investment office, all these kinds of things. So we really want to make sure, or I'd like to make sure that at least the frame of reference that I'm using is understood. I want to talk, as Danielle said, a little bit about this idea of family enterprise and family enterprise thinking. And that's really, to me, sort of at the core of all this. And ultimately then serving that family enterprise are these ideas of the family owner's manual and of course, family meetings, which are core to any family communication and success. So those are the things I'm going to go over. But as I said, I'm going to start hopefully a little entertaining with my story, which will give you at least some sense of how I hopefully am qualified to be here talking about these things today, and certainly where my experience in this arena comes from. So I'd like to start with this picture for a couple of reasons. Obviously, one is that it is not atypical. My father, who's there on the right, is a central part of the story. But this picture is unintentional. This was, as we were building the website for Leaf Planner, I think this is just really kind of amazing. One of my colleagues said, can you please send me a picture of you and your father so I can put them on the website as we tell the founder's story for Leaf Planner on Leaf Planner's website. And I randomly send him these two pictures. And the first time I see them together is he puts them on the website. And I'm like, oh my God, would
That
you
is
look at this? Like, first of
remarkable.
all, that painting behind my dad, which I'll talk about later, is sitting here behind me in my office.
Oh my gosh, this
And
is
I mean,
amazing.
obviously you can see like the fingers, the hand, I mean, it's just really kind of crazy. So I
Wow.
love to start with this. But my
That's
parents were pretty typical of their generation. They were their parents, so my grandparents had all pretty much been immigrants into the country from Eastern Europe. My parents grew up very poor. My dad ended up moving to Chicago from the East Coast to go to University of Chicago for college and then law school. My mom, typical of that generation, was a school teacher and helped put him through school. I think tuition, as I understand it, now granted, inflation adjusted, who knows what this really means, but I think tuition back in the early 50s for him was $250 and he didn't have it. So he was there on scholarship. Ultimately, he became a very, very successful tax lawyer and ultimately became kind of the tax lawyer to everybody who was anybody of that generation in that era. So this is really going back to the 1960s, 70s into the 1980s. If there's anybody on the call from Chicago, you might recognize in the top left there, Bobby Hull, who at the time was probably the most famous hockey player in the country. That's Mel Simon of Simon Properties. Next to him, Sam Zell, A.N. Pritzker, Hugh Hefner, Chuck Dolan, Saul Zantz. My father's footprint is kind of all over the place. And these were the kind of clients that he was representing. From a project standpoint, I mean, just astounding what he was involved in, everything from helping to build Cablevision and Ticketmaster, representing Creedence Clearwater Revival. I will say the only person I know on the planet who really kind of despises my father is John Fogerty. So I probably should leave that one off. But he was involved in bringing Second City to Chicago, which I'm sure everybody remembers was the precursor originally to Saturday Night Live, involved in the film industry. You can see there's just some of the films that he was involved in. I mean, really, again, sort of this kind of incredible career.
remarkable.
Downside, I'll say, to that incredible career is that he also became a target of the Internal Revenue Service from a very early day. He was audited every year from 1964 to 1994. So anybody who thinks audits are random, I would beg you to maybe alter your thinking about that. I'm pretty sure this is young Josh, my bar mitzvah picture. And as I was going into my young teenage years, you can see obviously the headlines there. My father was indicted by the Internal Revenue Service and ultimately then acquitted. But that was not a particularly fun way to grow up. This kind of comes to an end in the mid 1970s, and I end up going off to college. Really, we think as a family that this is kind of all over. But I go off to college. I went to Emory for undergrad, came back to Chicago for law school at University of Chicago. Ended up going into practice, as Danielle said, became a corporate and securities lawyer. All this is sort of happening, and my dad's frankly kind of protecting us from the fact that when the Internal Revenue Service did not successfully get him on criminal charges, they started going after him on a civil basis, on a personal basis. So starting in 1979, they began this case that went to trial in 1994 in Chicago, and an opinion came out not until January 1st of 2000. I imagine everybody on the webinar here remembers that on December 31st, January 1st, 2000, what we were all waiting for to wake up was to see if every computer on the planet had crashed because of Y2K. Well, we woke up to this New York Times article, as you can see here, tax lawyer called Architect of Tax Evasion Scheme. So here we were all over again, back in this kind of battle, although he had been in this battle. And in fairness, I came into this battle in the mid 1990s when this went to trial. And by then I was obviously a practicing lawyer and was really a part of this whole thing with my dad.
Wow.
So this comes out in January 1st, obviously 2000, as you can see there. And by May of 2000, we get the fabulous news that my father has cancer and is going to die. So we're in the middle of this massive tax litigation. We have a wildly complicated enterprise structure, very complicated balance sheet. My dad at that point had turned more to the venture capital world, and we were very involved in different venture capital. We were running two venture funds. We had venture
Wow.
deals all over the place. So lots and lots of complexity of what was going on. And my dad and my brother and I were all sort of loosely working together at this point. And going back to where I'll get to with the definition of family offices, I would not have called us a family office back then. I mean, 25 years ago, I'm not sure I knew what those words meant.
Right.
Looking back, I guess I would say, by certainly we were filing 750 tax returns a year, again, complicated balance sheet
Yeah.
and stuff. So we start appealing this case. In 18 months later, my father passes away. And the first thing I have to do, of course, is work on his estate tax return. His estate tax return ends up being 10,000 pages. If anybody is curious what 10,000 pages look like before you take it out of the reams of paper, that's why I decided to stack it up and look and see what does 10,000 pages actually look like when it's not a PDF
Oh
document.
my goodness.
Um,
Wow.
it's pretty crazy. His estate tax return was filed with a $2,500 check for estate taxes. That is obviously not the actual check, and ultimately was issued a no change order. So from that perspective, I have to say everything that he did worked, but it also was highly complex and really subject to obviously tremendous challenges because of who he was.
Wow.
So this is 2001. I've now spent 18 months with him between the time he's diagnosed with cancer and the time he dies. And I think I'm in pretty good shape because I'm a lawyer. I actually took my dad's estate planning class in law school.
Wow.
I had 18 months with him, which is a pretty unusual gift to be given, when you're looking at that kind of succession. Having said that, he dies, and all of a sudden, this is what I feel like I'm facing. These were the challenges that I faced. And I would argue that everybody faces some version of our complexity. Our complexity may have been a little crazy, but everybody's got their own level of complexity. Everybody's got their own challenges. So for me, those complexities, as you can see, kind of over on the left-hand side here, right? I've got the dying patriarch. I've got an uninformed. My mom had nothing to do with anything. She frankly knew nothing. So I've got the uninformed matriarch. I've got two siblings who are my co-owners essentially of the family enterprise. I've got 14 family members, complex
Wow.
balance sheets, 40 years of deals, complex structure, 750 tax returns, as I mentioned, multi-decade tax litigation. I'll get back to the tax litigation story as we continue, but this is going to end up going for 33 years, 30 years of audits, information. And I like this phrase, information is either everywhere or nowhere. And what I really mean by that is there are things that I don't know,
Yeah.
but even what I do know is in disparate sources all over the place. And that's where the owner's manual is partly going to come in. And then, of course, if anybody here, can think back 25 years, there was no Adipar, there was no Sage Intacct, there were none of these systems that help. So we have tax-based systems where this entity's data should never touch that entity's data. It's, really, really challenging, obviously, back in those days to think about consolidated reporting and holistic pictures and all the nice clever words we use today to think about these things. So how does that turn into challenges for me? We have people coming out of the woodwork, and I don't really even understand who my dad trusted and who he didn't trust, right? The number of people who would be, oh, your dad and I had this deal, or your dad owes me this, or all these
Oh,
things, right?
I can only imagine.
Relationships that I didn't know about. And again, I'll talk about that in the owner's manual of how does that translate to how we help our future generations or our families with respect to this idea of documenting relationships that we have. I didn't even understand, I realized why we had 750 entities. And I jokingly say, although I mean it sincerely, I believe to this day I'm the son of the smartest man I've ever met. There's a reason we had 750 entities.
Yeah.
So when I think about that, and I knew that I was about to spend several years trying to take this structure apart, I had to understand why it was put together. And I'm in 33 years of litigation with the Internal Revenue Service, so I don't want to step on a landmine. They know more about me than I know about myself. So very, very difficult to step into that. A little bit more jokingly, but kind of amusing, we found as we cleaned out my dad's stuff, undated safe deposit box receipt with no bank name and no date on it. To
Oh
this
my
day, I
gosh.
kind of, right, crazy. I kind of joke,
Ah,
I don't know if there's $1 million of gold sitting somewhere. The good news I always say is that we're Jews from Eastern Europe, so there's no family recipes in there, but I don't know what might have been in there.
uh,
Um, Personal employees that we had to deal with, and when we had no instructions of how to deal with them. I'm all of a sudden the executor and power of attorney and realize, oh my God, look at all the stuff I don't know. I'm directing tax litigation, estate administration, trustees, and really, I don't have any tools to educate and empower the rest of my family or to think about to test my own thinking and really to think about transition and succession. Again, these to me, these are my challenges, but I would imagine that many of you on this webinar can relate to those challenges or would view that you would have those challenges of your own in this situation. So hopefully that helps. But back to the timeline and the story. So we end up going to the United States Supreme Court in 2005. I also like to semi-jokingly say the best time to go to the Supreme Court is your 8th grade field trip, not to pay to get there. It's a very, very expensive place to get. But if you're going to go and then you're going to get a 7-2 winning opinion out of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that's pretty fun. So that
wow.
was kind of a cool experience. And ultimately we win that. Having said that, it takes 12 more years, I'm sorry, 7 more years until this case is finally concluded. And somewhere midstream there in 2009, you can see this Forbes article, from the grave tax lawyer to the rich beats the IRS again. So ultimately, this case started in 1979, goes until 2012. Complete victory for us in the end, but 33 years of fighting with the federal government is not a lot of fun. In
Oh,
the middle of that, of course, is where I get my family office education. So 2001, when my dad dies, I jump into the family office world. I really become a student of this world and trying to understand what is this all about and what does it mean? Everything from how do you think as holistically as you can? How do you think about family governance and dynamics? How do you, do all of these things? And so for the last 20 plus years, as Danielle said, this is the world I've lived in, both for my own family, then also trying to help other families, and really, again, being a continual student of the family office world. Uh, Ending the Kanter story, I'll say then when my mom passed away a few years later, excuse me, sorry, and my sister was left in Chicago to clean out their house that they'd been in for the 25 years before they died. And my sister comes across this letter, and I don't bother trying to read it, but ultimately we figure out it's a letter from 1954 from my dad to one of his law school professors that basically says he's in Washington, D.C. He's got an offer from a law firm for $1,500 a year, and he doesn't think he can support his family on that. And so you can see this line in red. At the same time, I thought it advisable to see the people at the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service and get my name and face known around there.
oh,
And
I love the irony.
so
Amazing.
we find this, right, almost
Oh,
60 years later and are like, oh my God, I wonder if he remembered writing this letter and
oh
what
my
how
gosh.
funny it would have been to have had this letter like before he passed away. But anyway, super,
Wow.
super fun. Um,
Amazing that you have these mementos and just
yeah.
the story it tells. This is really an incredible presentation, Josh.
Thanks. So that's the end of that story. That's kind of how I get into this world. So I still wear a family office hat for our family. We're 3 generations, 3 branches. I help a few other families with things like family dynamics, family governance, family meeting facilitation, things like that, just because I really like to stay as part of the industry and in it and learning from other families. And then Leaf Planner, as Danielle said, is really kind of the third hat that I wear, leaving aside a few nonprofit and other kinds of things as well. So that's sort of who I am. Hopefully that gives everybody a sense of why I'm here and excited to talk about this. And I love talking about this stuff. To me, the family office world has given so much to me in education and in collaboration. And I think it's kind of amazing how friendly and peer-to-peer the family office world really is. And so anything I can do to give back to that for all the people who have helped me over the last 20 years is really exciting for me to be able to do. So again, Danielle, thank you for letting me do this and share what I've
Oh,
been.
goodness, of
Um,
course. So personal. It is your world, the family
it
office
is,
world.
yeah, yeah. So, and I'm going to leave it to you, Danielle, to please interrupt me if you see things in the chat or anything else that we should take a detour. And if anybody has questions or comments or wants to have a discussion about something, I do want to say again, kind of level setting around this idea of a family office. And to me, the most important piece of the family office, and recently Eddie Marshall, who some of you may know, uh, came out with an article that had this quote in it. And I really loved it because I've been saying for a long time, to me, the most important piece of the family office is the person who's pulling it all together. It's not the do you have the best CIO? It's not do you have the best tax efficiency? It's not do you have the best estate planner? You can buy all those things. To me, it's this mindset. And he articulated it, frankly, so much better than I've ever been able to articulate it. So I think that in the circle is, all the things that a family office is typically involved in, whether it's a business or investments, tax and estate, risk and insurance, records and bookkeeping, philanthropy, lifestyle, family education, all these different kinds of things, and pulling it all together. And I love, again, Eddie's quote here of family. Now I got to move the pictures out of the way because I think it's actually worth reading, even though you can read it yourself. Family offices are more accurately described as a mindset and methodology because the primary objective of all family offices, regardless of resources, ambitions, family net worth, or operational and organizational style, is to improve the quality of life for families. Framed in this way, all of us technically have a family office. And what I love about that is the notion that family offices have been all of a sudden, come to a point where people are like, well, how much do you have to have a family office? And I get family offices are expensive. So I get that. I'm not suggesting that that's not a valid question. But I think to say you have to have a $500 million or $1 billion to have a family office, I'm not sure I really believe that. To have a successful independent investment office, maybe you do. To have a successful family office, I'm not convinced you do. So I like that definition. I hope that helps and makes sense. I do think, though, as people think about family offices, and especially in the first generation creation of a family office, if that's going to succeed into successive generations, it's important to really ask some basic questions, right? Why do you want one? What are your goals for this office? And what are those important functions now and into the future? And I'm sure everybody has read article after article about the difficulty of succeeding family offices from that first generation creation to the successive generations, because too often family members are saying, why are we paying for this? What is this thing, this family office? What are we doing and why are we doing it? So really important to be looking at the future and understand that. Really important to think about flexibility. The family office, what it does today may not be what it does tomorrow. And of course, the whole notion of buying versus renting different kinds of services and what do you want to in-house and outsource and those kinds of questions. Related to that, I think it's always important. This is from Family Office Exchange. There's a million of these charts around, really being able to look at what are the services that a family office could provide? What do you want to provide? How do you want to provide it? Again, in-house, outsource, all those kind of questions. I think we're sharing this deck, by the way, for anybody who wants it. And then also thinking about structure, right? Single family offices, multifamily offices, virtual family offices, and even from the entity structure side, LLCs, C Corps, and of course, the ever-present these days lender model. Keith Lender is actually a good friend of mine, and we used to joke that I had the most important tax case in history until Keith came along and he knocked me off that little banner. So it's a really important discussion for people to have, and it's obviously kind of the buzzword the last 5 years or so in the industry. Cost and complexity, obviously, again, really does come into this discussion about family offices. This is some data from Family Office Exchange about the cost of family offices. I tend to think this is kind of pretty accurate. At the low end, you're really looking at $1 million plus, depending upon what functions you're really insourcing and outsourcing and things like that. Obviously, the bigger family offices with big investment arms can get into the significant millions and millions of dollars. So really important to be looking at. And as I mentioned, the lender case and the lender model, for me, it's really, it seems to be, again, a little bit of a buzzword around the industry these days. And everybody is saying, oh, we're experts in the lender model. And first of all, it's really complicated. Second, it's really important to remember that that's not why the lenders did it. This structure was built long before they knew they were going to have to litigate what they litigated. And so it's really important to me that people think about, why are you doing it, and what services are provided, and whose money is being managed. There's a 1941 tax case I'm sure everybody's aware of that says you cannot deduct expenses when you're managing your own money, the Clifford case. So lots of different things here. And remembering that the lender model is not a safe harbor. The lender model is a case that got won, and that's it. And so anyway, really making sure that people think through carefully, have they looked at the benefits and the detriments of doing this profit interest structure, and is it meeting your objectives, and all these kinds of things. So I just encourage people, as they think about and talk about the lender model, to not just jump to this conclusion, it's the right thing to do. It may be, but it takes a deep analysis and understanding of what it's all about. Okay, I'll pause there for a second because I'm rambling, but then I'll jump into my notion of family enterprise thinking, unless Danielle, you say, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I have questions, but I suspect you're going to answer them. Yeah, I'm just so curious to hear, you were one of three children, and is that coming, and how you manage to work with siblings and delegate activities? Is that something that's to come, or that
Yeah, a
is?
little bit. I mean, I'll pause for that here for a second and say, it's going to come up a little bit as I talk about family meetings. But in my instance, um, my brother is basically our venture capitalist, and my sister is an artist, and she's married to a gallerist, and I'm married to a commercial real estate lawyer turned politician. And my brother's wife was mostly in the nonprofit world after leaving a law career. So there was, I think, a little bit of an obviousness, if you will, that I was the one who was going to step in and take this primary role as executor and uh, family office head, so to speak. Although I would say my brother and I have basically kind of co-run the family office for 20 plus years, other than he's a little bit more primarily on the investment side, and I'm obviously a little bit more on the sort of everything else side.
Yeah,
But like any family, we spend a lot of time talking about governance and having family meetings and educating everybody and figuring out where engagement's going to come from, and how decisions are going to get made about different issues. So, obviously issues over the years, our investment issues are decided differently. We've created an investment committee that's going to be different than, what's our distribution policy going to be. And so, like any family, we're thinking about maybe not as formally, but family councils and assemblies, and then obviously formal boards and investment committees on different entities and things like that. So, and just making sure, I'd say, that people understand those roles, because those words, and probably to our audience today, everybody understands those words. But when you say those words to other people,
right.
normal people who don't live and breathe this every day, it's complicated. Most people, and I don't mean this in any kind of disparaging fashion, it's the difference in the education that we all have. It's part of financial literacy and understanding what people know and don't know. Is most families that I work with, family members don't understand the difference between being a beneficiary, a trustee, a shareholder, a member of an LLC, a partner of a partnership, an owner, a manager. And if they don't understand these hats and roles, then it makes, and by the way, and we're family. And so
Yes.
if you
Love
don't
that.
understand those hats and roles, and you don't know how to change them, and I do have something about that that's kind of amusing in a little bit, that
Yeah.
that's really problematic. And so it takes a lot of work. And one of the things that I think this is going to come up in a second, but one of the things I really say to families a lot is, most families are used to focusing on the family business. And it's
Hmm.
really important that when you're getting into this idea of legacy and multi-generational success, that you have to focus separately on the family business and the business of the family. And what I mean by that is that running a family is hard work, and it takes investment, and it takes time, and if you think of all the time and attention you put into your family business, And if you're not putting that same time and attention and investment into the business of the family, why would it be any more successful?
Right.
I think it's a really fair question. So anyway, hope I'm answering a little bit of your question.
Communication. No, that was phenomenal and interesting. I mean, every family, the dynamics are different, but what I really loved hearing is that you each had your unique skill set and it was very synergistic. It kind of
Yeah.
complemented everyone, found their role. And then that communication and kind of defining how each person's strengths will play into the
Yeah.
great operations. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'll say to that, Danielle, building those strengths, right?
Yes.
So I would say, when we started this, um, excuse me, we started, let's say we started post my dad's death, so 2002.
Right.
And my brother and I were making investment decisions. And in the meantime, and this wasn't intentional. We didn't plan it. Some people plan it this way, but my sister, again, she's an artist. She goes and spends time sitting on um, museum boards and art center boards and different things for years and years and years. And ultimately, she finds herself on different investment committees and all these other things. So all of a sudden, she comes back. And when we created a formal investment committee structure, and we said, well, your branch of the family should be represented. I mean, you're a 1/3 owner of this thing. And my sister was able to step in and say, okay, I can do that. Now she uses, frankly, a completely different language. Like she makes up words, which is fine, but she makes up words
Get along.
and uses this completely different language to talk about investment theses and concepts than my brother and I do as a lawyer and as a venture capitalist.
Right.
But she's an equal participant in our investment committee in a really important way. And she acquired those skills by going out and doing other things. So it's really cool to see,
Educate.
families evolve and use
Yeah,
not just applying their skill sets where they are today, but giving them the tools or encouraging them to get the tools. She did that on her own. I didn't encourage
that's so
anything.
inspiring. Your sister
Yeah,
sounds
so really cool.
amazing.
So
Very
tied to this idea of the family office course is for me, this idea of family enterprise thinking. And what I mean by that, and I love this particular paradigm, which is from Dennis Jaffe, who I'm sure everybody is aware of, colleague in the industry. And I love this paradigm of moving from paternalism to partnership, because so often, especially now, obviously some of these things don't necessarily apply to, G4 and G5 and things like that, but especially when you're at that G1 and G2 level, and you've got young adult kids and all of a sudden you're trying to bring them into the picture, it's really hard to change those hats. You're so used to mom and dad and the kids at the dinner table or whatever that situation is, that to move into this idea of partnership. So I love this simple paradigm of moving from patriarchy to working as a team, from suspicion to trust, opportunistic to professional, passive to engaged, on and on. So really, I think powerful. And then I don't know, this doesn't totally fit, but I love this because I really like, I don't remember who coined the phrase, the 100-year family. And I really like that phrase when it comes to thinking about multi-generational families. And I'm sure many people on the call today have read some of Simon Sinek's books. And I read recently The Infinite Game, which I love because it's a business book, right? It's not about families, it's a business book. And yet, if you look at some of his quotes in this book about what it means to be a successful business and to play the infinite game in business, it, like, to me, of course, I'm reading it through my family office lens, and I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant, right? The great leaders set up the organization to succeed beyond their own lifetime, that it's the game that lives on, the players whose time runs out. These were such great quotes about thinking about multi-generational wealth transfer and legacy that I was like, I have to figure out how to use this because
They're
it's just
awesome. They
so
are.
amazing. So again, really, I think powerful when you think about what you're trying to do when you're looking at this idea of multi-generational wealth and wealth transfer and legacy transfer. And then ultimately, and obviously, this is, classic Jay Hughes, sort of the granddaddy of all of this thought of the family balance sheet, comprising more than just financial capital, but human capital, social capital, intellectual capital, however you want to think about it. And that it's really the family's financial capital that's serving to develop those other capitals. And when I think about family enterprise thinking, that's really the shift, right? You go from whoever that business builder was, focused on building a business to create wealth, to how do I use that wealth to build these other capitals. And I love this. I think it's attributed to Albert Einstein. I've never known whether that's really quite, whether it's his or not, right? But ultimately understanding everybody's human capital, to the extent that you can use this quote of everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll go through its whole life thinking it's stupid. So I think when we think about this idea of family enterprise thinking, it's how is the family's financial resources being used to support the idea of the family's, again, kind of human, social, intellectual, or however you want to think about those different piles of capital. So this was the story I was going to, again, also from a Jay Hughes book that I was going to mention as I was talking about those hats in response to your question, Danielle.
Yeah.
So I love this because there was actually, he tells the story about a family that actually printed hats. And so the father and the son are sitting down and they have their dad hat and their son hat and their boss hat and their employee hat or whatever. And the father puts on his boss hat and says, son, I have bad news. We have to let you go. And then he switches hats and he puts on his dad hat and he says, son, mom and I understand you've been let go. What can we do to help? And I
Oh, I love
love,
that.
that story
Yeah.
because it so clearly helps delineate the lines between these different relationships that we all have. And especially when you're mixing family and business and family office and family enterprise, and making sure that we're communicating, understanding that. I have a very different conversation with my sister and my brother when I'm talking to them as my sister or my brother, or whether I'm talking to them as another fellow equal 1/3 owner of this Kanter enterprise, right? And so it's really, really important that people think about those hats and think about the way they're communicating and what they're communicating, because if we communicate without understanding the role we're in when we're communicating, the other person is very likely to misunderstand how we're communicating and why we're communicating that way. So anyway, back to kind of something you had raised, and I love that.
Yeah, I love that. Everyone needs hats. This holiday season, go out and get your family
Exactly.
hats.
Um, so then I just thought, and then this is going to get into the whole notion of the family meeting and the owner's manual is sort of what are the risks to all this, right? And obviously we could have a long, long, long conversation about that, but I think of risks really falling into these three buckets. There's the financial management piece, the family and legacy, and the blind spot and planning piece. And I would argue, as I think everybody hopefully would likely agree, that most families, probably all families, including my own, spend most of our time in that lower left circle, financial management. And by the way, I'm throwing tax advice and estate planning and finding the best managers and the lowest cost, funds and whatever, all into that category. But we spend this huge amount of time and money looking after our financial assets, and we spend very little time and money thinking about family and legacy and this idea of blind spots and planning. And
Yeah.
that leads to that same comment I made earlier. Are you applying the same rigor to your family enterprise that you did to your business enterprise? And so ultimately, what this leads to this imbalance, right? And people have talked about this. This isn't obviously unique to me in any way, shape, or form, but people have talked about this imbalance that we spend a lot of time preparing assets and very little time preparing heirs. And that's a problem if ultimately your goal is successful multi-generational wealth transfer and legacy transfer. So that's really where that is. So I think as a gross, as it says, as a gross oversimplification, the two components to the solution to that are the family owner's manual and the family meeting. And so with that, how are we doing on time?
We're doing great. I'm so visual. So the way that it's obviously very, very complex, but seeing that model where the financial assets and then, the heirs, that is very powerful. And just seeing it in its most, simple visual form is this is an incredible
Excellent.
slide deck. So I'm
Excellent.
grateful you'll be sharing it with us all.
So first of all, let me here again, I'm going to say, and I'm going to stop saying this, and please take my word for it. I should have changed that to owner's manual from leaf plan, because this is really intended to be, again, generic, not about leaf planner. But when I think about an owner's manual, I love this idea of it's really a gift of love and peace, right? And we're really after four things from my perspective in the owner's manual. We want to educate, engage, and empower family members. That's really important. Too often, family members may have one or none of those three elements, but it's really important to me that you find all three. The second is really that information and workflow management is frankly just hard. I mean, it's administrative, but it's hard. We all get an estate memo or an administrative memo from the estate lawyer that says, don't forget to do these 6 things, right? Retitle assets, do the crummy letters, do the GRAP payments, blah, blah, blah. No normal human knows how to do that stuff. So making sure that there's some tools in place to do it. How do you think about blind spot identification and risk management? How do you think about succession of information? And this, I think, Tibetan quote that I love, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so if we can prepare our families they're not gonna, I can't take away the pain of my dad dying, but I sure could take away 10 years of suffering of having to do all the things that I had to do because he was gone. So that's kind of the core of the owner's manual. I'm going to skip over that. So let me, if it's okay, I'm going to show you a couple of things about what our owner's manual looks like, just to give you a quick sense of that. And then I really want to talk about family meetings.
Me.
Sorry, I don't think I was logged in. So, oops. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Sorry.
No, you're all good.
It's back. I'm going to show you a couple things, and I'm going to do this like in super quickly because I really, again, I don't want I want to talk about these family meetings, and if anybody's interested in talking about this stuff further, I'm obviously happy.
I mean, I feel like this needs to be a day-long workshop. It's just so good. There's so much involved. I wonder, do you do seminars? Do you do workshops?
Sure, happy to, love to. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I want to just really quickly, I mean, there's a lot of educational stuff in here. There's a lot of things. And again, I don't really want to focus this on what Leaf Planner does as much as what an owner's manual should do. So to me, this is how do you give a family an entire understanding? By the way, we called it the owner's manual 22 years ago when I started this for our family, because I'm sure everybody remembers the old, adage of you get an owner's manual with a toaster and not with a kid. And we said,
Okay.
well, let's take that a step further. You don't get one with a family of wealth either. And so
Right.
how do you give people an understanding of what do we do, how do we do it, where do we do it, why do we do it, everything what's all the context, because it was the context that was missing for me. I had all the information, well, most of the information. I didn't have that bank name on that safe deposit box receipt, but I had most of the information, but I didn't have the context, right? And so I want to add context. So when we talk about that, it's how does my family find, I've got a letter to my kids, I've got a list of people that people should know if something happens to me. But how do I bring those people to life? I mean, half my family doesn't know who half these people are. So why don't I give them pictures so they can see who they are? And by the way, we used to do this as a Word document, and there still were pictures in it of who these people were. So I don't mean that it's
Come a
exclusive
long way.
to how we do it. How do you identify who somebody is? Not just like, here's this guy, Saul, who's an advisor to our family, but what are all the things that Saul is involved in? So we wanted to be able to map out Saul touches all these different things, and you can see what role he plays. And I can use that. Saul actually passed away in 2022. He was our independent trustee for 53 years. I was able to come in here and use this as to run a fire drill to say, hey, I'm losing a 53-year advisor. If I jump from him, and it's really about, again, my sister, my wife, my kids need to be able to use this. So it's got to be done, however you do it. It's got to be digestible. It can't be
Yeah.
written by lawyers and accountants. It's got to be, how does my
Walk
artist
through
sister
it.
pick it up and understand it? How do I show you, here are the parties to this trust in a visual way? Where are the documents if you need them? This trust banks at Northern Trust. You can suddenly see everything my wife and I do at Northern Trust, like all kinds of different things. This trust owns my house. So by the way, here's my house. You're going to see my mortgage, my insurance policy, my vendors, my utility accounts, right? The whole idea is how do you create this, again, this kind of holistic picture of all these different things. If I look at one of my kids, you're going to see how do I make sure that I've got my kids' passports and Vax cards and driver's
Wow.
license and bank accounts and brokerage accounts and all these different things. You're going to see, and I promised I would come back to this painting, Danielle. So you'll see
Yes.
we're art collectors. So how do I share with my family, hey, we've got fine arts insurance. We have a database. I like to say, and hopefully everybody on this kind of call is well aware of this, but how many people forget to give their spouses access to their computer, their cell phone, all these things? My wife has that access, but if she's staring at 6,000 Outlook contacts, I don't know if I've helped her that much. I mean, it's better than not having access. If I can give her 6 people in the art world who I have deep relationships with, that's meaningful. How do I transfer the knowledge that this painting, again, was in my dad's office and now it's in my office, to share that emotional intelligence? How do I
Yeah.
share, if you're going to sell it? We have a wildly disparate deal between Sotheby's and Christie's, and people should know that. So
Wow.
again, it's like all of this kind of context that we're trying to put into this kind of thing, and it's really all the way down to and I don't want to go too deeply into this, but it's my parents passed away with a housekeeper who'd been with them for 40 years, and they left us no retirement plan and no instructions. Right? What do we do about that? How do I share? Where does my dog go to the vet, and what does she eat, and what does she have pet insurance? So we want to think about a owner's manual as this really, again, That's why it's called an
Yeah.
owner's manual. This comprehensive idea of what this family is all about and how it works. Okay, so I'm going to get out of there sometime. Happy to talk further.
Oh, wow.
About
I
that.
mean, for someone who's visual, again, like the organization, just all the things, yeah, like thinking about your pets. Are they microchipped? All the
Right,
things that are like loose pieces of paper that make no sense to
right.
anyone. It's amazing.
And disparately held, right? Because it goes
Yes.
back to my wife knows different things than I know, than our advisors know, than the lawyer knows, than the insurance agent knows. And it's how do you get it all into one place? I've got colleagues who will say, a client will say to them, well, don't worry, I've told my wife if something happens to me, call you. Except the guy is then saying, except you've never told me what to tell her.
Right, right, exactly. Well,
And what
no,
makes me think that
panic.
he knows anything? So
Right.
yeah, I mean, the level of in today's world, I hate to say it, but and it's kind of a first world problem, but we're all complex. It
Yeah.
doesn't take family office level worth to have complexity. If you've got a couple of homes, if you've got a couple of trusts, if you've got a couple of kids, if you've got a couple of dogs, if you've got a couple of private investments, start thinking about how many moving pieces are around that, and you're really complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so the
Mhm.
last piece of this, because I do want to see if there's any questions and stuff, is this idea of family meetings. And again, I could spend a whole hour just talking about multiple hours talking about family meetings. But I typically, when I work with families, may give them an agenda that says, like, look, here's a 10-year agenda, literally. Here's a 10-year agenda. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get through it, but we want to start with some basic building blocks, things like defining the family's legacy and values and shared purpose, really working on financial literacy and education. And by the way, financial literacy, in my mind, and I don't know, there should be a better word for that, because to me, that resonates of financial, right? And that it's about how do I read a balance sheet or how do I invest in the stock market? But it's what are basic legal documents and how does insurance work and how does credit scores work and all these different kinds of things. How do I lock my credit account, right?
Yeah.
All these different
Not
things are
really
really
teachable in
important.
school. Yeah, absolutely.
All the things that typically they don't teach in school. So, and then notions of responsible ownership. What's it going to mean for the rising generation to be responsible owners of this family enterprise? How do I think about that? Engaged ownership to me is something different. That goes back to this idea of shareholders and beneficiaries and trustees and understanding those roles and who's got a voting right, who's got a veto right, who's got an informational right, all these different kinds of things. Fairness and equity, always a big issue in families and deciding what does that mean and talking about it. I encourage people to really think about what I refer to as age, stage, and interest appropriate engagement. Families very often, as I'm sure everybody on here is aware, will jump into philanthropy as a place to engage kids. And by the way, if your kids are interested in it, that's spectacular. Go for it. But I will also say, how many of us at 18 years old or less really cared about philanthropy? I'm going to guess the answer is kind of close to zero. So finding ways that people are interested and engaging them in that interest is really important. When you think about estate planning, involving the kids, really important if they're old enough to be involved in it. I had some kids, you can see a footnote there about the sourdough starter trust. I had two 20-something-year-old kids in a family write the purpose statement for a new dynasty trust that was being created. And the daughter said to me, can we, because of course the lawyers had it, the so-and-so family dynasty trust. And the daughter came to me and said, can we call it the sourdough starter trust? I'm like, that is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard.
I
Yes,
love
we
it.
can call it that, right? And the kids wrote the entire introductory 4-page introduction to the trust and what the trust was about for the next 1,000 years.
I
Coolest thing
love
I've ever seen.
that.
So involve anybody you can. Explaining the plan. Anyway, sorry. Benefits of facilitation. That's the only other thing I'd say is family meetings are hard. And again, it goes back to these roles. And I'd really encourage people who are doing family meetings to think about the benefits of having an outside facilitator. It's very hard to take off your family hat, your mom and dad hat, whatever hat you're wearing, and say, now I'm here as the facilitator. People come with those prior tensions, those prior relationships, those prior expectations. And again, that would to me go back to you invested heavily in your family business. Now you got to invest in your family as well. And facilitation is kind of part of that.
Wow.
There you go. I'm going to shut up in case we have some
Yes.
questions and can talk.
Oh, we had a very enthusiastic yes outside facilitator. So everyone feels your pain there. And
Awesome.
Josh, that was just amazing. We do have some questions in the Q&A, so I'll start with those. And if anyone else has others they'd like to add, but yeah, it's just so educational, informative, and inspiring. I mean, you've really created something of tremendous use, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing this with other families. So an anonymous attendee asks, how do you develop a framework that protects the family office from blind spots, especially as the advances in technology mean we may not know what threat await future generations?
Interesting question. I guess, part of, unfortunately, I don't want to respond with a question of, so tell me more about what you mean, but
Right, right.
I think we can only do what we can do, right? But the more information that people have, I would say it's kind of part of the owner's manual concept, and looking for blind spots for me is the more I document,
Mhm.
and documenting doesn't have to be literally like, writing documents, I guess, but the more I can document what we do and why we do it and how we do it, the more, first of all, the mere process of documenting those policies, procedures, et cetera, right, forces you to think about, am I really doing this right? Now, again, I'd say the family office peer group networks of around the country and around the world are so great because everybody shares and are so willing to share each other's experiences. So that's a big part of it. I do think that as technology changes, right, really trying to think ahead and talk about what's going on. Yeah, I don't know. Hard question.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, I think too, I think I like that it's an active breathing process. Like you said, you never stop learning. You always are kind of reinvesting into the role. And that's what I think. I mean, it's just as technology changes, as the family members grow older, I mean, nothing is static. It's always
Yeah,
changing. And that's what I love about the whole process of Leaf Planner. It's there
yeah,
to be
yeah,
built. It's not one and done. It's a
yeah.
very breathing, living document. So
Yeah, and the only other thing I can say, I guess it's different to me than the blind spot question, but future proofing, to me is also, I had that little teeny comment in there about flexibility. And one of the things that Jay Hughes and some other people did a study of asking various families whether the rising generation could live within the plan, meaning the estate plan the prior generation, right, had created. And originally they came back and they said 200 families said no, they couldn't. And I was like, well, you didn't interview me. And now they say 200, there was one family that said they could. And I think,
ah,
I'm not positive, I haven't asked him yet if it was, but I think it was me. And the reason I say that is that, to me, what my parents did in the design of their estate plan, it's really my dad, but what they did in the design of that estate plan was leave so much flexibility, that what I like to say is that they gave us a blank canvas and let our generation paint the landscape that we wanted. And so it was obviously, I go back to that $2,500 check. It was tax efficient as all get out, but it
right.
also had enough flexibility in it to let us create the world that we wanted to see. And now my parents were firm believers in that we don't want to rule from the grave. So that has a lot to do with that. But
What a gift.
really interesting in thinking about future proofing is thinking about flexibility, and that we don't know what the world's going to look like. I would argue 25 years from now, let alone, now with the rule against perpetuities kind of blowing up everywhere here in Utah, literally our rule against perpetuity is now 1,000 years. So who knows
Wow.
what the world's going to look like then, if the world's
Exactly.
going to be here, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, Marty asks, please forward links to any background information regarding the lender case references. Curious what the lender models are or could be, etc. So yes, we'll send the deck and we can, yeah, I mean, I'm an avid note taker. I love that you reference so many good literary pieces and quotes, and I'm like, I'm excited to learn more and continue learning. So yeah, we don't necessarily need to take time, but we can forward a link.
Yeah.
And then I had the same thing. It was one of the Ed Marshall. I wanted to know where the article
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
referenced. But yeah, we'll try to find those things and share.
Have all those. That's easy.
Awesome. Sumit, which type of structures give the most flexibility? Three components: philanthropic foundation, acquiring businesses in multiple industries, and investments in VC private equity portfolio building, all for my own family office.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, in the philanthropic side, I personally am still a fan of the private foundation. I know that the trend has been toward DAFs, and we have both. And there's, I think, personally a role for both. But if you really are looking for flexibility, then I would argue that it's still the private foundation. And by the way, that's leaving aside CRATs and CRUTs and whatever. So in my view, given that you have more flexibility on investment management, you have more flexibility on the ability to hold complex assets, you have more flexibility on the kind of programs you can support than you do through a DAF. You have more governance that you can put in place. You know, theoretically in a DAF, you've got a donor advisor to whoever the DAF sponsor is. But if you want to involve the whole family, you could have an informal structure behind that, but it's pretty hard to get Fidelity or your community foundation to say, well, here's the governance structure around the donor advisor. So I think that the flexibility on the charitable side is really kind of still in that private foundation. On the business ownership side, I mean, I probably need to understand more about what you think about that, but I would say, I mean, obviously, you know, using LLCs and whatever, and where C corps are still appropriate. I mean, our family office is a C corp, so it's one of the reasons I don't really think about the lender model as the only option, because through the C corp we achieve a lot of the same benefits that the lender model does without any of the complexity. Having said that, obviously understanding where to, you know, mix businesses in the same LLCs or the same partnerships or all that, I mean, pretty traditional liability kind of issues going back. The only other thing then, and I'm not sure you said this, but in the question, but that I really like to think of is as families look at, and there was a part of that about like VC investing, for example. I like to think about, you know, what are the structures that we might just do a series of LLCs to invest in every fund that we're going to go into, to give family members maybe participation rights and different things like that. But we also may want to create asset buckets so that every trust or every family member can create their own asset allocations. And so without disrupting the fact that the family is investing as a pool. And so I think there's really got to be a lot of thought given to, again, flexibility for the future. But what are the goals? Are the goals ownership percentage differences, asset allocations, different things like that, and then coming up with a model, that an enterprise structure model that serves those questions and those needs.
Wow, and you can see where your legal background, you know, is really
Yeah, it doesn't
helping.
matter.
It's amazing, you know, so much. You're such a great guide. So audience participant asks, I've heard that venture investing for family offices can be complex and the due diligence is hard if you haven't made your wealth in that particular industry. How has your family been able to navigate this successfully, especially given so many years? Yeah.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a great question. And I think that, you know, there's this huge move in the family office world, I think. I mean, assuming I have some sense of trends, right, toward direct investing. And I think it's a really interesting trend because personally, I think it's a huge mistake. And I think a lot of families are going to end up regretting it. And I think that's because, first of all, you have a classic ego problem of anybody who's been good at one thing thinks they're good at everything. And that's clearly not true. So if you were, you know, built a hugely successful manufacturing business and now you're going to go into healthcare venture capital, well, I think you're probably going to fail. And maybe not, you know, maybe you really do have that Midas touch or whatever, but let's be realistic about it. So there's that problem. There's the problem of direct investing in the sense that it's really setting up infrastructure to accomplish true direct investing, at least the way we did it, right? I mean, you're probably going to have a CFO and experts in different areas and all this, and those are not people you lay off overnight. So if somebody decides, you know, 5 years from now, hey, why did we do this? Well, that's a 10-year wind down to maybe get out of some of these things. I think the expertise question is really important. So we basically have moved out of the venture. We started in venture. We became healthcare venture, sort of, I'll say experts. That was really my dad and my brother. And we've moved greatly away from the direct investing world, primarily because of succession issues and things like that. But I think you have to build the expertise in the areas that you want to be in, or, you know, frankly, I think people are better off in fund investing and doing those kinds of things, which is really where we've moved at this point, for simplicity and things like that.
Interesting to see the trends. And I'm sure you've mentioned, you know, some of the family office organizations you're a part of and just, learning from others and seeking continuous opportunities. All right, we have time for another. Let's see. Sudipto, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. Hi, Josh. I really appreciate you sharing your experience and amazing journey to create this product. I'm in the process of building a similar system, Vive.io, and would love to learn the biggest challenges you faced in managing the integrations. Do you have integrations to different?
Yeah, so it may be a question of what that ultimately means. I mean, for us, we're looking at integrations with everything from you know, Stripe kind of bringing in financial accounts to doing some AI with document ingestion to Adapar and those kinds of integrations. I'd say the biggest difficulties is leaving aside just, the development side of it
Yeah.
and being engineers, which is super fun, has been, cooperation from the other side. People like Adapar, for example, have open APIs. They're really well documented. By the way, I'm clearly not the tech person, so I'm just saying words that I think I understand. Other integrations are much harder because they're not really built to do that. And then everybody really wants something different, So what we've got, for example, an Adapar integration with Leaf Planner, and at the moment, in a sense, it's really kind of having to be customized for every customer that wants it, because everybody's Adapar instance looks different. And
Right.
first you got to understand, how did they implement their Adapar instance, and then how do we interact with it, and on and on. So I don't think there's an easy answer to it.
Sounds very complex. Yeah. Let's see. Subs asks, as Jay Hughes always says, generations need well-being. How do you objectively build well-being model? Have you experienced that?
Okay, I don't think we're gonna have time for that one.
Well, I know, and I know it's two. I was like,
Right,
ooh,
right.
and he said, I'll
Look,
sneak it
I'll
in.
say, I mean, I think that Jay's entire approach, and yes, I mean, for us, I think our family has taken an approach that would conform within the framework of what Jay, is talking about when he talks about well-being and using the family's wealth to, he does his this way, right? That wealth goes this way, that the root is the financial, and these are all the other things. And if you're this, you're already dead, then you're coming up out of the grave. So I think, it's just a really emotional way of looking at how does the family support itself and support each other, and provide the resources necessary, to do these things. And I think that's both a philosophy around the shared purpose around what the wealth is about. I think it's a lot of communication and making sure that people understand why certain things happen. I mean, unfortunately, I've got stories rattling in my head as I want to answer that, but I know we're out of time. So, but yeah, it's a really great question.
That is. Well, thank you everyone for the great engagement, the great questions. Josh, thank you. This has been
Thank you.
incredible. I wish we had more time. There are more questions. So for those of you, Marty, I will make sure that Josh receives those so we
Yeah,
can.
and feel free to ping me, ping Danielle, and
Yes,
I'm happy to answer any questions or jump on the phone with anybody and everything else. So, and
amazing.
Danielle, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I hope everyone enjoys their day. We'll send the deck and we'll send the recording. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.